Sully, I see you out there. Greetings. Okay, I'm going to start the recording right now.
Just did, Joe. You're good.
Okay. Oh, you just did. Okay.
You're good.
All right. Well, welcome everybody. Welcome to our monthly meeting. We have Bruce Cornet on today, Dr. Bruce Cornet. He's going to be bringing out some very interesting points. We're all hearing about the Tic Tac phenomenon that came out back in 2017 with the Navy releasing the images of very interesting objects that defy physics as we know them today. Well, Bruce has got a couple of ideas and he thinks that he's seen this technology in action before. And he has some very interesting exhibits that he's going to be sharing with us. And it's going to maybe shed a little light on a number of different topics. A couple of interesting points that just happened recently. Uh, we know that there's a lot of work going on by theoretical physicists dealing with the phenomenon known as the tic tac, looking at it from a propulsion standpoint as well as a metamaterials. We just had a slight conversation about probably what is a metamaterial right now that's associated with UFO technology, especially the crash at Roswell. Anyway, the physics that are being shared with the world, not quite taken as gospel yet, but it's an indication of a way that we can maybe approximate exceeding the speed of light, which is not something that is, according to normal physics, not something that we have been able to do. However, there are some ideas. There's some interesting breakthroughs in microwave technology and propulsion systems that was just announced today that is leading us down that path. And we may be seeing this technology becoming a reality in the not too distant future. After all, the interesting little sidebar, it was 2063 when in Star Trek, they first developed the star drive, the faster than speed of light transportation. So we have a couple of years yet. Well, anyway, without further ado, this meeting is being recorded. It will be uploaded to YouTube and maybe several other platforms as well. So before I go any further, I'm going to introduce you to Bruce Cornet. For those who haven't met him before, Bruce has been with us. He has talked about Pine Bush and the work that he did up there with Ellen Crystal. Anyway, Bruce, welcome to the meeting. Why don't you introduce yourself and cue me, and we'll cue up that first slide.
Thank you, Joe, for inviting me to present this. Some interesting developments have happened in the last couple of months relative to the interpretations of the Tic Tac and the gimbal and the Go Fast videos released by the Navy. A new character has appeared on the scene and published the UAP theory. And it's quite an amazing theory compared to others that have attempted to describe UAP activity or behavior. And I have seen many of the things that I've documented correspond with what he says is the way in which these craft are able to fly or fall, as he calls them. And I want to compare his theory in bullet form with my information that I have to present here as a slideshow.
Okay. Shall I cue up the first slide or?
Yes. Why don't we cue up this first slide?
All yours, Bruce.
Thank you. All right. No, you're not on the first slide, Joe.
Yep.
You're not on the first slide.
There we go.
No, still
Yep.
not.
Yeah, this is
There we
it.
go. Okay. The title of this talk, A Discussion on UAPs, as to which are alien and which may be human constructs. And if we go to the next slide, the Thor UAP theory and its predictions. This was introduced by Tim Ventura on YouTube. And that's an image of Tim. And he was very much taken by Thor's theory and promoted him and did an interview with him. If you go to the next slide. Joe?
I am. It's there.
You have the UAP, or I mean, you have the web YouTube link to that interview with Thor between Tim Ventura and Thor. And here he said in a release, a news release, UAP video from the 2013 Homeland Security sighting of Aquidal, Puerto Rico, shows a gravitational lensing effect, which offers insights into UAP propulsion and explains distortions in the visible shape and size of UAPs in reported sightings. In this interview, we're joined by Thor, the creator of his theory, Link, which has been rapidly gaining popularity by providing a detailed analysis of UAP footage along with a theory that explains how a UAP might travel by traveling along a geodesic of warped space. His model offers insight into UAP propulsion, high G accelerations, and inertia by explaining that UAPs can maneuver at sharp angles at high speeds because they move on geodesics and are in zero G. Thor indicates that the same warp bubble that enables the remarkable UAP performance characteristics that have been reported is also likely to create distortions to UAP appearance, especially during maneuvers. When the gravitational envelope is manipulated to change direction. Modulations in this gravitational envelope may allow the UAP to become completely invisible by redirecting light around the craft, thus obscuring its appearance. In addition to redirecting light around the craft, the warp bubble may be capable of redirecting the path of matter, such as air, water, and high energy particles as well. This would protect the UAP in space from radiation and micrometeorites and prevent drag and heating in the atmosphere. The same technology may also enable the UAP to seamlessly transition from air to water at high speed, as seen in several UAP videos. Thor has a Bachelor of Science in Astrophysics and a Master of Science in Geophysics, and is becoming online authority of the UAP phenomena as a result of his detailed analysis and predictions, which are firmly based on conventional and established models of physics. His website is affiliated with the SCU, the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies, which seeks to provide science-based insights into this phenomenon. Next slide, please. Joe? There.
Chris, you got to be patient.
So, thank you. This is the image of Thor that appeared on the video that Tim Ventura talks about, just so you know who this interesting character who has come out of left field and presented ideas that others have failed to understand. Next slide, please. Thor. This is Thor's theory. According to our insight, UAPs are not flying, they are falling. UAP follow geodesic curves, which can appear like an arched or curved flight path. By geodesic, they're following the curvature of the Earth. I comment, I frequently captured such arced flight paths when UAP flew over observers on the ground. I wondered why they would be flying in that particular path as they came towards us and departed. They would always brighten their lights, as you see in the left part of this diagram, and then dim the lights and start their approach to the observers on the ground. And I have graphs below it which show this increase in the light intensity before they would begin their flight path to us, or falling path, as Thor would call it. Next slide. Was this flight path, performed by many UAP I documented, the result of not breaking the laws of physics, or were the pilots trying to keep a minimum distance above observers so that they could not make out details of the craft? Ellen Crystal, Silent Invasion, 1991, had triangular craft fly low over her, as low as 36 feet. On the bottom of one wedge-shaped craft, she saw what she thought was an outer yellow translucent glass layer separated from a darker metal hull. Thor suggests that such a feature is characteristic of an energy field surrounding the hull. Thor, requiring that UAPs are consistent with the laws of motion, leads us to a gravity drive, for lack of a better term, which has the following implications. UAPs should be round or geometrical, as there is no preferred forward-facing direction. Since they use space-time as their control surface, they need no wings or afterburners. And Thor says, pause for a second and note that we just obtained the known design of UAPs only from our demand that UAPs don't break the laws of physics. Their shape just pops out of it as a consequence without putting it in first. And this is an important statement by Thor, because a lot of the craft that people see or claim to see, including me, appear to be structured, angular, and not round like the Tic Tac. I comment, however, the UAP and Dr. Ellen Crystal encountered in the Wallkill River Valley were mostly angular, not round or elliptical. Thor fails to recognize that UAP come in all sizes and shapes perhaps because they can create a holographic envelope around an oval shape in order to appear different in shape. UAP I witnessed could also change shapes from diamond shape to triangular. Next slide, please. Some of the most important black and white photographs taken by Dr. Ellen Crystal in 1980, that's a long time ago, before the number of black triangle sightings increased in the late 1990s, shows ultraviolet radiation exploding from a triangle. She also captured a picture of a dome-shaped craft on the ground with a group of humanoids illuminated by that radiation standing in front of the craft. It is highly unlikely that alien craft or ETVs would emit that much radiation, which could be detected. Thus, what Crystal caught on film might be early prototypes of ARVs, or alien reproduction vehicles, that leaked radiation and which were deliberately flown around Crystal in order to convince her she was seeing alien craft. Was this an early attempt to trick humans into thinking that exotic anti-gravity craft without wings were not made by humans? Next slide, please. These pictures come from Ellen Crystal's book. And what's important to show here or point out is the triangle in the center, the large picture, with the UV radiation coming off of the triangle. Another strange characteristic of these early triangles was that there was a pilot window up front, right in front of the craft, and she claimed that she could see what appears to be a pilot inside that flight deck on the craft. And in some of the other pictures that she shows, she again shows in the upper left a triangle with what appear to be windows at the very front. She also shows an elongate rectangular craft with square windows and headlights. And she also shows triangular craft that are not perfectly flat. In the bottom, though, she shows what appears to be a triangle with seams between different plates on the bottom of the craft. She was insistent that what she was seeing was a metal craft that appeared to be joined together by plates, and maybe these plates were coming from different crashed craft and assembled to create some of the earliest reproduction vehicles. Next slide, please. The number of Black Triangle sightings in the Wallkill River Valley before 1991 was relatively few compared to the number of sightings in the early 2000s. This jump in observations was captured by NIDS in 2000 when Dr. Colin Kelleher combined the databases of NIDS, MUFON, Hatch, and Newfork. If this increase is not due to a first wave of alien invasion, as Kelleher posited, then it could be due to human-built ARVs as Lockheed Martin began mass producing them. And I haven't heard anybody else suggest that this is a possibility for this rapid increase in sightings after 2000. Next slide, please. Plasma lights. One important characteristic of the Wallkill River Valley UAP is that all of them have and use plasma lights, not lamps. That is an important characteristic that Thor did not bring out. This fact was emphasized by Thor because the Tic Tac and other Navy examples did not have multiple separate plasma lights. These plasmas can be moved independently of other plasmas and off of the hull of the craft, making this a feature critical to all UAP. In other words, a true UAP does not have lamps. Plasma lights can be distinguished from lamps, which are fixed on conventional aircraft because they can be moved independently of other plasmas on the craft and be moved off of the craft hull into an energy field surrounding the craft, making this feature distinct for all UAP. And unlike conventional lamps, plasma lights can be intensified and increased in size by orders of magnitude. Aircraft headlights are limited to high beam and low beam. Next slide, please. Here's an example of one of the first triangles that I captured on video back in August of 1992. And this particular craft flew right over my condominium, went west, and then turned around and came back and flew by us and disappeared behind trees. What is important in this is what I was able to capture on video was how the lights, the plasma lights, move around or change position. And you can see in the diagrams that the lights are not solidly fixed. Now, as this craft was changing its orientation, perhaps Thor would argue that the distortion field on the craft would give the illusion that these plasmas were moving around or changing position. I don't know, but I have other examples which clearly show that these plasma lights can be moved from one part of the hull of the ship to another. Next slide, please. Plasma lights on the manta ray were deliberately broken up into bubbles by the pilot. Note nitrous oxide fume, atmospheric nitrogen and oxygen. If you look on the left image, you can see that the left light, a headlight, has been broken up and it produces actual bubbles, plasma bubbles, identified by a plasma physicist, that these are plasmas and that the interaction between the plasma and the atmosphere created the fumes that you see coming off of these plasmas. This is a very distinctive feature. The question, of course, one might ask, well, has our military, our government, replicated this type of technology? And I will get into that in momentarily. Thor,
Bruce.
UAP can maneuver in, yes.
Yeah, I was just going to say, with the aspect of the plasma showing up, especially on the edge of the vehicle or at the headlights or whatever you want to call them, what would the effect be of plasma on something like radar? Do you have any idea?
It could disperse the radar and help to create invisibility.
Okay. Oh, all right. Thank you. That kind of gives me a thought.
Right.
So, okay.
Thor, UAPs can maneuver in sharp angles at high speeds because they move on geodesic, and the bottom of my line is missing.
And 0G.
There it is, on gravity.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and on 0G. And what's important here is that the geodesic is a curved flight path. To the pilot, according to Thor, that his flight path would be straight. But to observers on the ground, his flight path would be arched. And as I said early on, most of the examples I had early on in 92 and 93 were of craft that arched over us and then descended behind us and disappeared into farm fields. That's something that conventional planes just can't do. Military wouldn't do that either. Okay, next.
Okay.
Slide. Here are two examples of right angle moves that Thor talks about. They're quite spectacular in that there's no question. For example, on the one on the left, you can actually see red and green navigation lights, which raises interesting questions to some people. The skeptics want to say, oh, that just means it's a conventional plane, but conventional aircraft can't make right angle turns like this without killing the pilots. And you can see that the strobes continue to fire consistently, where there's no break in the number of strobes and how they fire. On the right side, you see another double angle right turn as a triangle jumps up in altitude and creates a clear pair of double right angle turns. Thor, particles are moving along the curved geometry of the space surrounding them, avoiding the craft. Thus, UAPs have an envelope of vacuum around them and can move without friction, both in air and water, which they can enter and exit without impedance. They can move faster than would be possible for any craft that is in contact with the air or water. Next slide, please. Here's a photograph that was given to me by Vincent Police, who wrote the book, The Pine Bush Phenomenon, in 2005. He shared this photograph with me, I believe, in 1997, which shows a craft making two hump-shaped deviations from a straight path. Such movements conventional aircraft cannot make and survive. The lights appear to be descending from left to right based on a squiggle at the top left representing the shutter vibration of the camera when the shutter opened. So this is a path of a UAP that cannot be duplicated by a conventional aircraft with wings. Next slide, please. The Russians experimented with plasma lights on jet aircraft in order to eliminate air compression and sonic booms at the nose of a supersonic jet. That same principle appears to be used by UAP. Next slide, please. On 10th May 1994, I had an extraordinary experience with two other people, the pilot and a Japanese cameraman, when we went up in helicopter to fly over the Wallkill River Valley, which you're seeing in this image. And Stewart Airport Air Force Base is located off to the right. And there was a special ops training center and airfield where the arrow is pointing in the top center. But that airfield, that special ops airstrip has been totally destroyed and removed by the government, interestingly enough, and it's been turned into a bird sanctuary. So, and in this picture, I capture the image of a supersonic craft, UAP, flying from lower right to upper left as it traversed the valley in less than a second. Next picture. During this flight over the valley, our helicopter was buzzed 3 times by the same UAP. You can see the map here on the right, which shows images that were captured on my camera and the direction of the UAP or AOP by the red arrow and the direction of the helicopter by the green arrow. Now, what is strange about this is how these pictures were made. There is no way that anybody could take a picture of a bullet coming out of a high-powered rifle without knowing when the rifle is going to be fired. And you would have to also know when the bullet would be in front of the lens, which is another interesting important thing to realize here. And when we were flying west in the valley, I framed a distant image in my Minolta XG7 camera viewfinder. I went to push the shutter button. Suddenly, a voice in my head loudly said, "Wait." I looked at the pilot to my left and at the Japanese cameraman to my right, who you can see in the helicopter above, but neither was talking to me or looking at me. I went to take the picture again, but as I started to push the shutter button, the same voice said, "Wait." So I waited, holding my camera and pointing at the same area. Suddenly, the same voice said, "Now." I pushed my camera shutter button. The witness in the helicopter we saw a bright flash of light marking the path of an object flying in front of the helicopter, traversing the valley in a second. Excuse me. The helicopter was gently bounced by a shockwave. The pilot moaned in surprise. There was no sound. This type of encounter happened 2 more times in a period of 20 minutes. The camera shutter speed was set at 1/1000th of a second. So the only way I could actually capture what I photographed was when the pilot knew when I would be when he would be in front of the camera lens, not just in front of the helicopter. Next slide, please.
Hey, Bruce, hold on a second. What I'd like to do, I'd like
Yes.
to take a little break here, and I'd like to kind of invite some comments or questions. Okay, you have a lot of information to absorb. So right here, I think we can get some interesting points, and you might be able to shed some light on them. Why don't we start with Nick Curto?
Hi. First of all, Bruce, tremendous research. I followed some of your videos. I just want to tell you, congratulations. You're the man. You've done incredible research. Thank you so much. I wanted to just start right off with that.
And I have to thank Joe and Bruce Pearson for having me on and being able to get this information out. Now consider that my research occurred between June of 1992 and August of 2003, the 11 years.
Okay.
And you don't see very much of this on any ancient alien shows.
No, not
Which
at
is
all.
a
You're
shame.
absolutely right, which is shocking when you think of that. Also, I wanted to say that Dr. Stephen Greer once said on a lecture, he said, when you're looking at a UFO and you can see it fairly close, if you're seeing that it's totally smooth, that the craft is totally smooth, it's from somewhere else. If you're seeing rivets or any parts pieced together, it's from here.
Uh-huh.
I just thought that was a very interesting thing that he mentioned. I wanted to put that out there for you.
Okay.
Very interesting. Thank you, Nick.
Yep.
Bruce Pearson, do you have two things for you, Bruce Pearson. First of all, to everybody that's sitting out there right now listening to this presentation, if you have any comments or questions that you'd like to be brought up right now before we get to the Q&A section, just raise your hand or use the texting. Bruce Pearson will be monitoring that, and we can get your question into the queue immediately. In the meantime, Bruce Pearson, why don't you, do you have anything you'd like to add to the conversation? Any questions, or so on?
Well, this is beyond fascinating. I mean, and hard evidence in the form of analytics of these photos and the trajectories and stuff. Being a pilot, clearly, the flight characteristics exhibited, and we've all said this many, many times over, and it's pretty obvious, far exceed anything that any airframe or any power plant could do, nor beyond, what the biologicals could withstand. So this is incredibly valuable research that Bruce has done, and it's very detailed. And I want to applaud you for the amount of analysis that's behind it. It's not just photos and some, I would say, less than empirical analysis of it. I think that your analysis is extremely detailed. Also, I want to mention, I want to welcome Robert Morningstar for joining us. I appreciate it. I'd like to hear some of his or Stanley's input also.
Absolutely. Thank you, Bruce. We do have one monitoring the chat here, and we do have one question. And basically what it is Bruce, you mentioned Thor early on in the presentation and throughout your slide deck. Could you go into a little more detail explaining exactly who Thor is and why he is now being brought into the world of Tic Tacs, if you will?
Very good question. That question really needs to be sent to Tim Ventura, and his introduction of Thor on his video interview. It's amazing that he got to contact, was able to find Thor because Thor wanted to remain anonymous. He was working in apparently a sensitive area where he didn't want his employer to know that he had come up with this UAP theory, and he didn't want to know that he was using the name Thor. That's my guess, based on the fact that you can find his website out there, but he does not put any contact information whatsoever. And then Tim Ventura was able to contact him through his contacts and get an amazing interview, which for the link for that is at the beginning of this talk. And the important thing is that you're dealing with theoretical explanations as to how UAP operate and function, being joined here with physical and field observations of their behavior and function. And I'm essentially adding to his theory, rounding it out and adding information such as the nature of the plasma lights and how they can be manipulated, as well as in the later part of this talk, I'll be talking about telepathy. And one of the things I want to emphasize is that there's a big question as to whether or not what we're seeing in the skies are built by extraterrestrials or built by humans. And the one thing that stands up hard that the human-built pilots cannot duplicate is the telepathy. So if you have an encounter with a UAP and you get response from them, some in your head, that they're literally talking to you in your head, that is not a human doing that.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Bruce. Just to share with everybody, Pine Bush area of New York and the Wallkill Valley, where Bruce has spent so much time and effort uncovering all of these interesting points. It should be noted that back in the late 80s, early 90s at least, the Air Force Research Lab was located on a small airfield not too far from there. And their specialty area at the time was flight systems. So if we want to put two and two together and extrapolate a little bit, I think the question as to whether this is a human derivative of alien technology or alien technology in of itself, I think there's a strong indication that there's a convergence right here. And that's the reason that I think Pine Bush is very unique, as well as the rest of the Hudson River Valley. And one final point that I'd like to make at this point, and I think it's very pertinent to the timeline. I was talking to Bob Spearing, who is an investigator. He's a field investigator from MUFON, who moved from New Jersey to Pennsylvania not too long ago. Bob also was a presenter at one of our library sessions that some of you may have been at. Well, anyway, Bob is now involved in the establishment of a Pine Bush UFO Museum. So maybe somebody who is on this presentation today might be able to expand on that a little bit and share, because Bruce Cornet should be definitely front and center as part of any of those efforts, in my estimation. Anyway, do we have any more?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
We do, Joe. Sophia, I think, was up first, and then Robert Morningstar has a question. So go ahead, Sophia.
Okay.
I have two quick comments and then a question. Along with Stephen Greer saying that if it's a non-terrestrial ship, it won't have seams. It's also not going to have any red and green lights. So that's another tip off. My second comment is you keep referring to the 90-degree angle turns and that like a human couldn't withstand that. I question whether these, if they are extraterrestrials, ultra-terrestrials that are coming to Earth, they may have a different dimensional body that doesn't at all react to G-forces the same way our 3D physical body does. So that's my other thought.
Okay. My reply to that is that if you do not reduce or eliminate inertia and mass, the whole structure of the craft making a right angle turn like that would just tear it apart. That's one of the reasons why these new ideas and theories are so important as to how this geodesic flight path and the lack of mass and inertia is critical for these to do the behavior that we see captured on video and film. The other thing that I wanted to comment on is you are correct about the red and green navigation lights. That was one of the things that I first noticed and wanted to know, why were they putting on navigation lights? And I'm going to get into that in my talk. And that is largely, in summary, due to the fact that the Wallkill River Valley has a flight paths of both military and civilian aircraft over it constantly. And these beings live in underground bases on the west side of the valley. They come up out of their bases and fly in the same traffic that conventional aircraft are flying. And in order to be inconspicuous or below the radar, as they might say, they have to mimic conventional aircraft. And that's why they put on these red and green navigation lights. They don't need those navigation lights, but those are largely to fool people. And that was one of the tasks I had out there, is to be able to distinguish these craft from conventional aircraft. And why I took so many videos and pictures of conventional aircraft as well as these UAP for comparison. And I'll show you the differences. Okay.
Okay, Bruce, I think we had another one, right?
Yes,
Next
Robert,
slide.
would you like to join us, please?
Yes.
I'd just like to say that Bell 47 isn't going to do Mach 3 turns. And, you know, I can tell you that's not going to happen in that. Go ahead, Robert. Thank you.
Yes, great to be here and great to see so many friends. Bruce is a very dear friend. We've worked together for over 30 years. I flew for Bruce. I did an aerial survey of Wallkill and Pine Bush. We drove up there together. I myself was passed by 2 Tic Tacs in 1990. I was making a flight from MacArthur Airport, a solo flight to Albany, Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, and back. And as I took off in the morning, the haze was clearing up, and I had clearance to leave MacArthur. And suddenly I saw 2 objects on my left side, port side, climbing slowly through the haze. So I announced it to air traffic control, and they claimed that they couldn't see them. Now, the odd thing is that in this area, this terminal control area, we were required to have transponders. That's a radio in the airplane that sends out a radar signal. So your plane doesn't have to be hit by the radar to show up. You actually send the signal, and it's got a code number, a squawk number,
Right.
that identifies you. Now, I saw these 2 objects climbing, and I made 3 reports to air traffic control, and they claimed they couldn't see them. I was at about 2,000 feet and climbing out. They passed the front of my plane. I'm going to do this with 2 fingers, and just imagine 2 eggs. And 2 eggs came across the nose of my plane like this. And then I flew on by them, and I saw them from the tail. And after they passed me, which was over Northport, Long Island, they really took off, and they crossed Long Island Sound in about 7 seconds. That was my estimate. The odd thing, or the remarkable thing and the beautiful thing, was that they were egg-shaped this way in profile. Tiny, tiny little dome. And I'll talk about dome and cupola in a second. But the 2 eggs went by like that. They were so tight in flight, they looked like they were tethered, but there was no cable. Like a glider, when it's pulled by the tow plane, the cable keeps them the same distance apart. But the glider will also fly up and fly down, or oscillate in the airstream of the tow plane. Well, these 2 moved just like this. The odd thing was, when I looked upon them from the tail, they were egg-shaped. They were egg-shaped this way too. So profile side view was this, and tail view was this, eggs. And it was such a beautiful sight that the only thing I could compare to it was the hull of America's Cup yachts without the keels, 1 on the top and 1 on the bottom. Regarding the lights, yes, I think the green and red lights confuse people. Now, as a pilot, I can tell you this. All red lights that you see flying in the sky, if they're aircraft, they go from right to left. And all green lights go from left to right. So if you see a red light that's traveling from left to right, you're either seeing a UFO or some pilot is flying upside down. So bear that in mind. Last point. Last point. I suspect that the Tic Tacs are terrestrial craft, and that they're being shown to us as a cover story, as a prelude, because I don't believe anything the government says. I will never believe another word the government says, the way it's behaved over the last 40 years. The liability is too great for the government to admit that they've been withholding the truth, AKA lying to the public. So I think we're getting ready for another huge smokescreen at the end of June when they're supposed to hand in their report to the Senate, as if the Senate had anything to say about anything anymore. Anyway, that's what I wanted to say. And it's a pleasure to work with Bruce. And I feel honored to have gone up there one night and hung around all of these places, the graveyard, and got spooked out by some of my night vision too. So good to see you all.
Yeah, thank you, Robert. Robert, one question for you regarding your sighting of those objects. What was the actual color?
Thank you, Robert.
Oh, sure.
What was the actual color?
Oh, beautiful cream colored aircraft. And I wanted to say this. People are always talking about the cupola. You shouldn't talk about the cupola unless you're inside the craft, because the cupola is the inside of a dome. So if you're looking at it from the outside, it's a dome. And if it's a cupola, you're looking at it from the inside. So just to straighten out the jargon. So if you hear me talking about the cupola of a UFO, it's an admission that I was inside it.
Okay.
Yeah, that's about it.
Joe, could you, when we're doing the Q&A, would you mind dropping the slide so that we can see the people speaking?
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Please.
Well, one last point, important point. The location where I saw I wrote an article called that I named "Two Eggs on a Roll, No Beacon," which was a pun on transponder. And the thing that makes me suspect that it was ours is that I encountered them climbing out from the area of Republic Airport in Farmingdale. They cut across me by the Northport Stacks. And if you extend that line, they looked to me like they were heading to the Sikorsky Airport in Bridgeport. And of course, we know Sikorsky is a big deal when it comes to helicopters and that new technology. So thanks a lot. I'll listen now.
Joe, you need to stop sharing, not go out of slide mode. That's all it is. So we could see the
Okay.
speaker when we're doing the Q&A. That's all I was suggesting.
Okay. All right. Do we have any other questions right or comments right now? Raise your hand or say hi. Seeing none, let's go back to Bruce and his presentation. So let me go back to share screen. All yours, Bruce.
Okay, thank you, Joe.
Mhm.
Well, from the previous one where I was showing the helicopters and the paths that we were flying over the Wallkill River Valley, here is an enlargement of the craft that first buzzed our helicopter. And you see it outlined by plasma lights. Now keep in mind that the film that I was using was 400 ASA. It was analog film. And it was not capable of picking up low levels of light. So you do not see any reflection off any structured craft simply because the craft was traveling so fast. How do we know how fast it was? Well, if you look at the bottom of the image, you'll see that I estimate the width of those lights to be 15 feet. If that width was less, the speed of the craft would be less. You have two bright plasmas offset in front, and I've shown a tetrahedral shape to suggest the possible shape of what the actual craft looked like. And then you have a series of over 40 smaller plasma lights at the back end of this triangle, and they are moving relative to one another. They're not all fixed or stationary in position. And you will also see that the pathway, in a thousandth of a second, has been blurred on the backside of the rear of the craft due to a visible shock wave at that location. So by computing the distance those lights traveled in a thousandth of a second, I came up with a speed of over 3,600 miles per hour if the craft is 15 feet in width. And that's extraordinary. And that would also agree with the speed that we saw when this was this flash in front of us that traversed the valley in less than a second. So, and without a sonic boom, and that shock wave in the back bounced the helicopter. And in fact, when it buzzed our helicopter, each time it bounced the helicopter. Next slide, please. So I show a little bit more information here on the right, the outlining the path of the lights at the back of the craft, and you can see that they're not all parallel. And I suspect that they were behaving like a rudder to guide the ship through the air. Two bright plasma lights offset, modify the air passing around the fuselage of the UAP. And 46 plus smaller plasma lights at the back of the craft modified the direction of airflow like a rudder on a ship. The hull of the craft is not visible because of the slow speed of the film, which could not capture light reflected off of the hull. So it was traveling at 3,681 miles an hour if the width of the craft was 15 feet. Next slide, please. Reverse Doppler, the smoking gun for evidence of anti-gravity metamaterials. What I discovered when I first was recording and analyzing the sounds made by these craft was that they were not normal, anything but normal. Thor, in his theory, UAPs move very quietly or silently, unlike jets. They may not create a sonic boom when going supersonic. However, some UAP produce sounds. If a UAP produces sound, the structure of that sound will be inverted and reversed from normal due to the interaction of metamaterials in their hulls. Discovered that UAP in the Walker River Valley of New York attempt to mimic the sounds of conventional jets, as well as their navigation lights. Now, it's interesting. We saw many craft, both triangular and diamond shaped, lifting off from, or almost lift what appears to be very close to the ground in a distant farm field and arcing over us. And as they approached, the sound there was hardly any sound until they got right up near us. And then we would hear the sound, what it sounded like a commercial jet engine. And everybody in the group that was watching this happen said, oh, it's just a jet. Well, the sound was a beautiful way of camouflaging what they really were. And if you look at the frequency spectrogram at the bottom of this slide, you will see that all of the frequencies are coming from a black triangle here, were parallel and individual, as if created on a music synthesizer. But as the craft got closer to the microphone, the frequencies of all the sounds in unison dropped until, and also the spacing between the frequencies decreased until it was over the mic. And then gradually as it moved away, the frequencies increased as the craft moved away from the microphone. This and that interference that you see in this spectrogram is due to Ellen Christo screaming out as it flew over and exclaiming, that craft is solid. That's a solid triangle. This doesn't have wings. It has extra booms sticking out in front and back. And so we got a lot of information from that particular flyover. Next slide, please. Here's an enlargement of the left side of the spectrogram. You can see much more clearly, and following that white line, how the frequency drops. This is called reverse Doppler. It's exactly the reverse of what you would expect from a conventional air sound moving towards the microphone and moving away. Next slide, please. Also, there's no white noise. Conventional jets and airplanes produce lots of white noise, but you see no white noise here. You also see in the middle of the spectrogram a disturbance that goes across from left to right, and those are crickets in the background. So next slide, please. Here on the left, we have spectrograms from the man array from the 10th of August, 1996. As it approached the microphone and moved away, you can see the amplitude of the sound gradually increasing until over the midpoint over the microphone and then gradually decreased. On the bottom part of the image, you can see the reverse Dopplers decreasing as the craft approached the microphone. Where if you look at the vertical arrow pointing overhead, that's when the 747 passed over my camera and mic, and you can see that you don't hear very much until the aircraft is right up upon us, and as soon as it passes overhead, you get the blast from the back of the engines, and you see the increase in amplitude, and it's very different from that of a conventional, from a UAP. And you also at the bottom, you can see the normal Doppler, where the arrow points where you're starting to get a frequency decrease from that midpoint where it flew overhead. Next slide, please.
Bruce, could I jump in here and ask a quick
Yes.
question?
Go ahead.
You made the in your analysis that the audio was absorbed, perhaps, would not be the proper mechanism to describe it, but had something to do with the material of the hull. Could you substantiate where you came up with that theory? Because I could see if you were nulling the audio with like it doing a null of the exact frequencies, but I'm not sure what the mechanism is where the hull would absorb.
Well,
this.
the sound was presumably, Bruce, the sound was being made by the craft, okay? It was being projected out from the center of the craft or whatever the speaker was on the craft. And I recognized it being a reverse Doppler sound that we were picking up and recording, but it wasn't until Jack Sarfatti, a theoretical physicist, examined my data, and he recognized that metamaterials are what reverse and invert the sound by their special properties, which also are involved in creating the anti-gravity UAP. And so you have the sound being produced regardless of what the craft is trying to produce. I've recorded things that sounded like jets taking off from airports that were being projected artificially by the craft, and they could turn the sound off at any point or time. I had one in which it came, as it flew towards me, it sounded like a jet taking off from an airport. And then when it got on top of me, it cut its sound completely, went totally silent. And then as it descended on the other side of the arch path, geodesic curved path, it turned on the sound that is typically associated with the X-Files, and UFOs. And it was almost like the pilot was saying, okay, yep, we're a UFO. Here's proof of that. And in either case, the sound was reverse Doppler.
Okay, I follow what you're explaining in it, from an evidential standpoint. It's just, I think that falls into the FM categories we used to say in broadcast engineering, and Stanley will appreciate that, but it's something magic. So it's above my pay grade to understand that, but please go on. I didn't mean to interrupt your presentation.
All right, the sound, by the way, the reverse Doppler is due to a negative refraction index within the hull material, the metamaterial, that switches things around, reverses things. And instead of gravity having control and pulling down the craft, it creates a negative gravity, which causes the craft to rise. And this has the same similar effect on sound. It inverts the sound as well.
Okay, yeah.
So
But thank you for that explanation. I
Right.
guess have to look at Sarfati's presentations and try to understand.
Yes.
Thank you.
But that is, regardless of what causes it, that is a characteristic that is always associated with these UAP. And no conventional aircraft ever produced any reverse Doppler. These UAP traverse the valley under and within the flight paths of conventional aircraft, which are going to or leaving Stewart International Airport and Air Force Base near Newburgh, New York, on the east side of the valley. Many of them turn towards the main runway at Stewart at a red beacon on top of Thompson Ridge on the west side of the valley. In addition to lights and sound mimicry, the ETVs were designed with triangular shapes that resemble triangles and wing shapes, but without the extended fuselages in front of the triangle or in back of the triangle. Instead, the triangles would add booms in front with lights on them in order to mimic conventional fuselages with lights on the fuselage in front of the wings. And these here are pictures of black triangles in which you can see the leading edge of the delta shape coming together at those central lights. There's no room for any fuselage sticking out in front or in back. Now, go to the next slide, you DC-9, and how the strobes on the DC-9, when they fire, they illuminate the tail assembly and the forward fuselage on the craft. So we have a DC-9 on the right here in this series of images. You can see that in front of the wings, you have a pair of lights along the fuselage, but you do not have a fuselage in the FT on the left, but they will put lights out in front on the left on the triangle to mimic those of the DC-9. And you can see in the lower right image on the slide, the tail assembly is clearly illuminated on the DC-9. And what I realized is that these craft were trying to mimic the conventional aircraft, both in the navigation lights, position of hazard lights, and the sounds that they produced. And they did a pretty good job. But it took literally my recording of the videos and the sounds and the analysis to be able to know what was really happening here. It fooled me. Typically, how did I know when I was looking at and photographing a UAP versus a conventional aircraft? Well, most of them flew well below, and the FAA regulations require that if an aircraft is further than like a mile or two from the airport, they have to fly above 1,000 feet, usually around 1,500 feet, unless they are on approach for landing. And many of the craft that I ended up recording that turned out to be UAP were flying well below 1,000 feet. Next slide, please. Thor, we should see gravitational lensing around UAPs when they maneuver as they must change the geometry of their distortion field to change their trajectory. If this optical effect is large enough, we should see the UAPs change its shape as it accelerates and turns. We may also see the background of the UAP distorted in its vicinity. Well, Scott Stride, a friend of mine who works for JPL, made friends with a Walter Williams way back in the 90s, early 90s. And Walt, as a child, saw a craft hovering above him in near White Sands missile range. And this encounter happened in July 11th, 1965. encounter area was before Oro Grande, which is east of White Sands Missile Range on Highway 54, before White Sands Missile Range Route 2. Scott said, I drove there in 1997 from Alamogordo to El Paso. Walt had a very vivid memory of the event. It was the catalyst for his obsession with UFOs. Changed his life probably for the worse because it led to some mental issues. He was very smart, but did not have the education that would have propelled him to better things. That tunneling aspect of the encounter was what really impressed him. He was very clear about the wobble to 45 degrees and the black distortion with the laser points of light inside, and the lights shifted in color until they disappeared from the visible spectra, as if there was a huge Doppler blue shift happening. The wobble to 45 degrees always interested me. It could have been a maneuver needed to orient the craft towards its destination. And that is consistent with what Thor was saying. You'll see in this animated GIF, the craft is very low to the ground. It was only about 10 feet above Walt Williams when he got out of his parents' car to take a leak in the desert. And it then jumped up and tilted 45 degrees. In the next slide, Scott shows the information in the second part of the description. Please change to the next slide. Here you can see the disc-shaped craft jumping up very rapidly in height, and then it suddenly disappears with a black hole, a wormhole, as if it were, suddenly appearing where the craft was as it took off at warp speed. There it goes, boom. And you can see what Scott tries to show is that you could actually see the star field in space at that point, because it created a tunneling effect as the craft went out into outer space. And this is exactly what Thor was trying to describe, and as the craft would take off. I think it's spectacular that we have Scott being able to make these animated GIFs and to illustrate exactly how these craft take off, which complements what Thor was saying. Thor, point 5, is the most important one. As light enters and exits the distortion field, the light pattern angles. Let us say this clearly. I'm being blocked on my.
Hey, Bruce.
Go to the
Bruce?
next slide.
Bruce, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Joe.
Okay, I'm going to say that the sound is it's deteriorating rapidly, Bruce. What I'm going to suggest is that you dial out or log off and then come back in immediately. Use your phone, come back in over the phone. Let's see if that clears it up. Did you hear me, Bruce? Bruce Cornet, are you there?
Yeah, I think it's deteriorated to the point where he's.
Yeah,
Which are you talking to?
Bruce Cornet, you. Okay, you're deteriorating very badly, and I think that we have that.
Joe?
Yes, can you hear me? Can you hear me, Bruce? Bruce Pearson, see if you could raise him.
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, okay. What
Okay.
I'm going to suggest you do, Bruce, is disconnect and redial in, because you have a deterioration of even your phone line is getting to the point where it's getting too spotty to keep up with you. So could you disconnect and reconnect to the call, please?
Yeah, use your phone.
Well, I'm on my laptop right now.
Well, we're losing you. It's not
Yeah,
acceptable.
it's getting progressively worse. So Why don't you just use your phone, break the contact and dial back in and see if that clears the queue or whatever. We'll take a quick 5-minute break.
I was going to say, if you have a moment, I'd like to describe my observation of this same phenomenon here in New York City. On
Yes.
June 1st of 2019, I had the closest encounter of my life, and I've had a lot of them.
Joe,
So this
drop
one-
the slide, please. I'm sorry to interrupt you, Robert.
Yeah.
No, leave the slide.
Okay, you want the slide? Okay, oh,
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
sorry.
yes,
My
yes.
apologies. Go ahead, sir.
No problem. That's actually why I took advantage. The slide is excellent to describe to you that I was sitting on the Soldiers and Sailors Monument at 89th Street and Riverside Drive, waiting for a Tai Chi class to start, when an airliner flew over my head, and the sound of the roar of the airliner was bouncing off the marble floor. The entire monument is made of marble and granite. So it hit me in the face, and I looked up, and as I looked up, I saw the airliner heading toward LaGuardia, and remarked, as a pilot, you're always looking for everything. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw something behind a big tree that's at 89th Street and Riverside. It's actually on the southeast corner near a school. I saw something behind the tree, and I turned my attention to that, and I saw a perfectly spherical object emerge from behind the tree. My estimate was about 50 feet in diameter. It looked like this, and I was mind boggled. It was a lead colored. And when you see something like this, your brain starts to try to make sense of it. So I said to myself, a lead balloon? Because it rose right straight up the street. I mean, vertically between buildings till it got about 100 feet higher than the building on the left side, which was 15 stories high. I had noticed it and pointed it out to my girlfriend. I was walking along trying to always keep it in view. When it got above the building, I saw it start to glow like a halo, and it looked like it was starting to rotate. My expectation was that I was going to see the sphere rotating and staying the shape of a ball. But when it rotated, it turned into a disc. And as it turned into a disc, now this was all vertical flight, just straight up, like an elevator, straight up. When it got above the building, it rolled, it glistened, it turned into a disc, and then began horizontal flight and flew a curved course around the monument and waved. It oscillated wings. Let's call it a wing, a flying wing. It oscillated, tilted left side, right side, left side, right side, and so on throughout the whole rest of this horizontal flight. And it brings to mind Bruce's point about telepathy, because I got a telepathic message to me. And the message was, happy flying. It then took off. I followed it around the monument. It took off and went off directly toward Teterboro Airport. The upshot is this. I wrote up, I think, the longest article on my personal UFO experiences for UFO Digest, which is now archived. If you go to ufodigest.com and look at the top, it says video update. And I have some photo facsimiles that are similar to what we're seeing here, but actually some that are photorealistic of what I saw flying over the monument. The upshot is this. I published the article. It was very, very popular. 2 months later, I came across a video taken on the Verrazano Bridge by a dash cam. And the driver driving at 50 miles an hour into Staten Island captured the same type of UFO, if not the identical UFO that I had seen on June 1st, but he had captured it a couple of years before. It flew across horizontally, across the cabling and the towers and the signs. But because I've flown this area so many years, I was able to calculate the track, the course of this UFO. When I extended its flight path, it went to the Statue of Liberty. And if I extended the line, it went to Teterboro Airport. And if we extend the line through Teterboro Airport, it's heading toward Pine Bush. So if you'd like to read a really extensive article on all of this with some pretty good images, it's about UFO sightings in New York City during that year, which were extremely high.
Yeah.
UFOdigest.com. And as long as I'm,
could you provide the link, sir? If you could.
that is it, UFOdigest.com.
Okay.
And if you look at the top, it's the premier article. I'd like to just say that we owe a lot to Dirk van der Ploeg, who founded UFO Digest in 1999. I started working with him in 2004. He passed away in 2014. And I kept it going for 5 years, but it was just too much, mostly because of the hacking. We got hacked a tremendous amount of times. So I have UFO Spotlight at WordPress.com. So if you want to keep up with the work, it still goes on. And thank you. Thank you for having this.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you. Okay, I think Bruce is back with us. Bruce Cornet, I see you're on. I see your mic is engaged.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, did you dial in on your phone?
Yes, I'm back.
Okay. All right, all yours.
I'm trying to get my phone to work. It's now not cooperating.
Okay, well, we hear you clear right now, but if it deteriorates again, might have to do the same thing. So let's give it a shot.
Okay. Okay. Hold on just a minute. I got somebody at the door.
Okay.
Just let me interject a real quick, just a sidebar. My parents had moved out to the Southwest in the native reservations, and my mom was for a short time until they got positioned in Carrizozo. And several months ago, I was visiting her down in Asheville, and just we were reminiscing with my sister, who's out at now at Holloman Air Force Base in Alamogordo. And she mentioned that a lot of the parents said that they had seen, I just happened to ask her, I said, you know, did you ever hear anything about any UFOs around White Sands? And she said, yeah, a number of parents said that they had seen or their kids had seen stuff. So that was a pretty active area around White Sands, and Carrizozo is, you know, right on the edge of White Sands. I just wanted to pass that along because it's anecdotal and it's worth everything you're paying for it, but it kind of corroborates the last story we heard about Oro Grande. So just want
that's
to,
right.
while we're waiting for Bruce, go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Bruce. Okay, Bruce. Okay, I muted Bruce. Okay, Bruce, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, all yours.
All right, next slide, please. Okay, Thor, point 5 is the most important one. As light enters and exits the distortion field, the light paths follow the curvature of the space-time and exit at different angles. Let us say this clearly. You don't see a UAP directly, since you are always seeing it through the distortion field, like an object in a distorted glass container. Here is an image of the manta ray approaching us over Skull Point, New York, in August of 2003. And as it approached us, it was able to move its lights, turn lights on, turn lights off, also move a pair of lights in front that were vertical, move the one on top forward, and then down to right next to the one on the bottom, and then move that light towards the back of the craft on the belly of the craft. This is clearly something that conventional aircraft can't do, but also we saw this craft lift up from an underground base in that area, and one that my friend Billy McNamara, who invited me to his residence to see, he said that he's seen trucks, cargo trucks, going down this one very private, small, narrow road with do not enter and signs and no trespassing signs at the beginning of it. and that road would disappeared into a valley, a ravine, where the entrance to this underground base was located. Now, that raises some interesting questions as to who's operating this base, because it's clear that humans are supplying somebody underground with materials. So this raises the interesting question is who's actually building these craft that I witnessed and who's flying them. Next slide, please. This blots the direction and path of the lights in that video. And you can see from the on the right side where the craft began its approach towards us, and it rotated sideways as it came towards us. And as it rotated sideways, it slowed down, and by the time it stopped, it was pointed away from us, but it had been moving towards us even as it turned on its side. And once it had reached its final point, like a skater on ice, pushing off in a different direction, the craft took off in a new direction. You can see this pattern here, and it shows up even better on the next image or slide, showing the path of the craft from the lower left as it was coming towards us, and as its lights were getting further and further apart. And then where the green area is where it was actually turning around to face backwards as it continued to move towards us until it eventually stopped, and then it off in a different direction, just like a craft floating in an anti-gravity field. But the important thing is that this all happened over what appears to be an actual underground base this would be east of Poughkeepsie, New York, at Salt Point, New York. Yeah, next slide, please. Here you can see as the craft is turning, it's oblique in the lower image, near sideways in the second image, and sideways at the top image as the lights are moving further and further apart. Next slide, please. Now, back 11 years earlier, Ellen Crystal and Fred Brock and I had videotaped they've seen pictures of this before, breaking up its plasma lights to produce plasma bubbles. And you will notice that it is following the same arched path as it flew over us, and that the pair of lights in the front, in the center, the one on top moves down to next to the side of the one on the bottom, and then starts moving backwards along the bottom of the craft. Next slide, please. This shows the map view of the cemetery where we were observing the craft. It came from the top of the map, and it was descended behind trees, then came out from between the trees and made a zigzag path towards us and then arched over us. It was traveling only about 20 to 30 miles per fixed wing aircraft. Next slide, please. And this one was filmed in a very similar location, and it was the manta ray once again. What is spectacular about this is you'll notice that the lights on this video are quite pronounced in different colors and in different places, and they're flashing in areas where there are no structure on conventional aircraft. And indeed, it had a little white light right up on top of it, and a bright light on the right. And it had red and green lights trying to mimic or camouflage itself. And there's your basic kite-shaped image of what the manta ray looks like. So we have to ask, who's flying these? Who built them? Where do they come from? And where do they hide? They're able to go underground in an area where nobody suspects that there are major underground bases in the Wallkill River and east in the Hudson Valley area. Next slide, please.
Bruce, hold on. We have Robert Morningstar raised his hand. Robert, you have a comment?
Yes, here's a perfect example of what I was talking about before. If you're looking at an aircraft flying, you see a red light, that red light should always be going from right to left. And green lights should always be going from left to right. If you look at this and you take this to be an airplane, the red light is on the right side, the green light is on the left side, and they're going in the wrong direction. This would be an aircraft flying backwards, if you understand what I'm talking about.
Yes,
So
exactly.
it reverses the Doppler. And a little later, toward the end, I want to share something very special with all of you. It has to do with anti-gravity drive and a diagram that I have of one of our anti-gravity drive spirits. It's something that I learned 30 years ago from our friend Mark Whitford, and it's taken me more than 30 years to find the diagram, which I'll show you a bit later when Bruce is finished with his presentation.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Robert.
You're welcome.
Okay. Bruce, here's the next slide, I think.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
UAP surrounded by glass. 4, UAPs may appear like they are glass since it has an envelope of vacuum around it. Light moves from air into the vacuum and then back into the air as it exits. When light moves from air to vacuum, it gets refracted, partially reflected, just like entering glass or other media. At high, direct sunlight may be lensed, reflected, and refracted to produce the gleaming spots or rings around the UAP. A pilot can then have the false impression that the UAP is surrounded by glass. Well, if this is the case, look at this image that Ellen Crystal published in her book. And in the caption, it says, a triangle passed over with a yellow sheet of translucent glass covering the metal belly. This craft also had headlights. So there we have an observation and illustration of what she was seeing and what Thor has been talking about. Next slide, please.
See it, Bruce?
Thor, the energy output
Okay, I think we have some dead air.
Hello?
Bruce? Yes. Are you there, Bruce?
Carry on, Bruce, if you can hear us.
Okay, I can hear you.
Okay,
Thor,
go ahead.
the energy output of UAPs should be significant, causing the air to heat.
Not looking so good right now.
Okay, okay, Bruce, until you can get back on, I'll read the slide.
Back.
Are you there?
Okay. I'm here.
Okay.
Okay, the
try
energy
it.
output of UAPs should be significant, causing the air to heat up and emit visible light like a light bulb. We can expect this, but it's clear this will depend on the design and the speed of the craft. If a UAP is cloaked, it may run on low energy and speed to avoid detection. So we cannot rule out that it's possible to avoid the thermal radiation depending on circumstances or craft design. I comment, the UAP puts on a display here on the right to the east of the Dogleg Bend in West Hearsville Road on 2 September 1992. It even creates what appears to be two flames extending to the right near the top of ascent before moving south, clearly indicating that whatever this craft was, it was creating an illusion of lights and jets coming out of it as it jumped up to a higher altitude and then took off to the south. Thor, some UAPs should display conspicuous rotation before disappearing. Since the maximum speed of any craft needs its engines to run at maximum capacity, we expect a UAP to use all of its space-time manipulation capability to accelerate to its top speed. But the engine is normally used to hold the object up against Earth's gravity and to make maneuvers, which we can expect to require a particular orientation of the craft depending on its design, likely pointing the engine down or up. So this is important from the standpoint of illustrating that what you see is not necessarily what is actually creating this light pattern of light. And so many times people who witness UAP will describe lights doing things in the night sky. And even sometimes they'll say, well, these lights appear to be connected and moving in one continuous, like as if part of a single structure. So that's what we have here. And it's important to realize that, as I'll show momentarily, that UAP can create illusions and holograms of images around them that will deceive the observers into thinking that what they are seeing is the actual ship, and they never get to see the actual ship. Next slide, please. Thor, to switch from normal maneuvers to its top the travel point in order to focus the engines in that direction, creating something akin to an Alcubierre metric, which is a geometry where space-time is contracted in front of the craft and expanded behind it. At least with some UAP designs, in particular flat designs, we expect the rotation of the craft before a jump to top speed. Spherical or cube-shaped UAPs may not need this, since the field generators can be placed all around the shape of the craft, ETs versus ARVs. UFOs keep going in circles or cycles of belief without proof. The more governments release on UAP, the more upset debunkers and skeptics become. They then start making extraordinary claims that most UAP cited today are built and flown by humans. There are a number of people who have said most UAP are military craft and are man-made, while others continue to believe that most UAP sightings are ETVs or alien-built vehicles. I have heard or read that the following people claim that our military has such craft. Michael Schratt, for example, Mike Turber, who's on a major email list, and he's actually published videos on YouTube where he claims that all UAP are military. Then you have Mark McCandlish, who's a strong believer that all UAPs are military. And William Tompkins, who wrote about them as having a solar warden project, that we've been out in space and gone to other planets already and colonized other planets. And then you have Paul Hallier, who was the former Minister of Defense of Canada, coming out recently and saying that we are already on Mars. We have Americans on Mars. We have Germans on Mars. We have other ET species living and colonizing Mars already. So this is one of the biggest cover-ups, and I'm sure that the government is going to have a hard time living this down if that truth ever gets out. Next slide, please. ET telepathy. During the first 6 years of my 11 years investigation into UAP and unidentified aerial phenomena in the Wallkill River Valley of New York, I encountered numerous examples when taking photographs when it became apparent that the object I was photographing was making motion, operating the object, knew when I opened and closed the shutter of my camera. Many times these objects were thousands of feet away from me. It also became apparent that the UAP or UFOs knew when I was at my observation locality and they came to me and put on performances. It soon became apparent that the intelligence operating these craft, whether biological or artificial, was using the film in my camera as a canvas in order to convey messages, not the way humans might understand a message based on language, but in movements and symbols. I soon realized that the movements of the lights on my time exposures were coordinated with my thoughts and actions. Thor did not consider ET telepathy in the development of his system, or thought either with a robotic machine or with other biological beings are not what Thor was defining as attributes of a UAP. I comment that as yet, telepathy may be the most important factor if demonstrated by its effects to distinguish ETVs from ARVs. Human pilots, as far as I'm aware, are not capable of reading the minds and thoughts of observers on the ground or on conventional aircraft. And yet, many UAP sightings involve ETVs include an awareness of the human observer that the intelligence aboard the craft is aware of their presence and thoughts, which may be why the use of flashlights to signal the craft have a positive response. It is unlikely that human pilots would be prepared to signal with their vehicular lights. I don't know of very many examples of that. Okay, next slide, please. Here's a beautiful example of how the craft responded to my thoughts and actions on the ground. A black triangle came at us from the west at sunset, arched over us, and then dove behind trees to our east. As you can see in the photograph on the left, that there is a light movement at, I call a tail, at the beginning of the time exposure, and another movement of the lights at the end of the time exposure, right before I closed the shutter. Then just after I opened the shutter again, the light moved back to its central position along the axis of the movement of the craft. And then at the top of it, at the end of when I closed the shutter, the craft jumped up in height. There's an enlargement to the right there showing just how amazing the light movement were. And that raises some very significant questions, because just because this craft has red and green navigation lights on it doesn't mean that it's a conventional aircraft. You can see very clearly that the navigation lights were turned off. Then the central lights, or headlights that we would call, were jumping around in position and distance from the axis of the craft. You can see that the craft continued straight on through this between the two spliced photographs. And then in the beginning of the next photograph, the lights came back to the central position, and all the lights, then the navigation lights turned back on, and they all spiraled down. That's quite amazing when you think about it. How can these craft move their plasma lights off of structure unless they're able to manipulate and shape the energy and electromagnetic field of around the craft itself? And that raises the question of, okay, what are we actually seeing? Is this real or a fake image? And you can see on the to the right here how the lights were being manipulated and moved from one position to another, as if they were being programmed to be in that position. And on the bottom, there's a picture of a tendril, as I call it, where after I opened the shutter, the light made a oscillation movement that dampened very slowly, and it took 10 seconds for the light to the oscillations to dampen completely. And this I got many times when I was taking pictures, and I wondered why I would get these movements. And I thought at first they were the camera vibration, and I checked that out, and they weren't. And then I saw the movement of the craft, that it was actually at the craft where the lights were being moved. And I began paying attention to what I was doing when I was taking the picture. And initially, when I was taking photographs, I had an audio recorder on. I had a pad of paper with a pen in my right hand. I had the electronic switch to my Minolta camera in my right hand, and I was opening and closing the shutter by saying open shutter, close shutter. Well, I thought that maybe the pilot was listening to me, so I stopped saying open shutter and close shutter, but the oscillations continued. Then I realized I was thinking open shutter and close shutter in my head, and when I stopped doing that, all the oscillations stopped. So it became clear to me that the pilot was literally reading my mind. And then the picture that I showed you of being buzzed by that tetrahedral shaped craft, and the pilot actually talking to me telepathically saying, now you can't get any more direct evidence of telepathy than that. Next picture slide, please. On the left, we can see image that was taken on the 29th of April, 1993, before the sightings camera crew, in which we had 5 crafts show up and put on performances in front of their cameras, literally. I mean, we couldn't have asked for anything better for the camera crew, but they never showed most of the video footage on the television show. Apparently, they were told not to. Here we have in the upper left image 5 different craft moving in different directions. And you'll notice in the image below there were the enlargements that all of them have tails on at the beginning when the shutter of the camera was opened. And you can look to the right and see the angles that I measured to show that all of these tails are at slightly different angles. They would have all had been at the exact same angle if this was a vibration of my camera. Then you go to the right, in the top right image, you can see here that the pilot created 3 different effects when the shutter opened on my camera. A brightening initially, then a tail, and then an oscillation. So there was no doubt that all of this information was being transmitted to me to let me know that they knew exactly when I was opening and closing the shutter of my camera. Then in the bottom right image, you can see where on this particular time exposure at the beginning, I opened the shutter and then there was an oscillation. But near the end, when I closed the shutter, the oscillation occurred before the shutter was actually closed. How did the pilot know that I was going to close the shutter? Was he, precognitive, or was he reading my mind? Because I realized at that time that I was saying open shutter and close shutter in my mind, and they were reading my thoughts. Next slide, please. And then I discovered that you can have two different people next to each other, both with cameras on tripods, taking pictures of the same event and getting something different in their cameras. Seeing something different and photographing something different, 2 feet apart. Here we have a series of time exposures of showing a light that came on above the treetops and rose up into a cloud, then dropped down and took off to the south. You can also see that there was a red ball that came out of the light just before I closed the shutter and dropped down and did a figure-8 loop just above the trees. Then you can also see in the third time exposure the white light zigzagging back and forth before the light went into the trees. Ellen Crystal was standing right next to me. She was photographing with her SLR. Her photographs do not show that red ball of light doing what it's doing, and my photographs, nor do they show this zigzag motion just before the light went into the clouds. And I thought, well, wow, maybe we need to do an experiment. So I got my friend John Macedo Jr. To help me with operating one of my cameras, 2 tripods next to one another. And you can see in the right diagram, my SLR on the left and the camcorder on the right. And you can see also the image of what is on the and on the video, showing that both forms of media captured something different, completely different set of lights and different pattern. And what was most spectacular is that as the lights on the left, I saw that clearly and described that to John, and he said, no, I didn't see that. I saw what you see here on the right. And when I looked at the video, I noticed that right where the light, one of the lights brightened considerably in my time exposures, there appeared a smaller light below the other lights in the video. And it was clearly obvious that that light was visible only because it was no longer polarized. And so that it would show up and show me exactly when these, coordinate the timing of the video and the time exposure. Plus you will see a green glow on the left side of the images here on the video, that on the side of the camcorder that was closest to where I was sitting and where I was viewing. So there was a slight electromagnetic interference with the, based on what I was seeing on the video, that was what John was seeing. So here we have an absolute proof that they can project 2 different images to 2 different people standing as little as 2 feet apart with where each of the people think that what they're seeing is all that they are seeing, and that everybody else is seeing the same thing, and that's not the case at all. So be aware of this. When you're out with a group of people, make sure that you get them to write down or draw what they actually saw. And you might be surprised to find out that people are going to draw different things from what they think they saw. Next slide, please. Could the truth be staring us in the face? But we are too afraid to connect the dots. Could the ETs have been on Earth for longer than humans have been? And they are both the controllers and the protectors. It is not just that the military-industrial complex wanting to keep the hidden cooperation between ET and humans a secret. It is the ETs who want details of their relationship with humans to be kept uncertain or a secret. So this appears to be a cooperation between ETs and humans. And this is what we're starting to begin to see coming out in the disclosures. And many of these disclosures seem so outrageous that we have human bases on the moon, human bases on Mars already, and we have huge starships that we're traveling to nearby stars already, and yet it's all been kept a secret, largely because the ETs do not want the public to know, as much as the humans and the government don't want the public to know. So when you see a UAP, you may not be able to know if it was built by non-humans or by humans, simply because they are now being built on Earth and in Earth and can be piloted by either ETs or by humans. In other words, we may have to get rid of the word ET. They're all terrestrial. They're just T's. The merging of technology is ongoing and nearly complete. Thank you for listening to my story.
Oh, thank you very much, Bruce. Okay, this is a good point. I'm going to take down the slide here and stop the share. And everybody can now join, and we'll go through a Q&A period. How is that? Okay, who would like to start it off? Okay, I've got a raised hand here.
Go ahead, Robert.
Robert Morningstar. Go ahead, Robert. I think you're muted.
Yeah, you remain muted. There you go.
Sorry.
No
That's the
problem.
bane. That's the bane of all Zooms and Skypes. You know, you start chatting and the mute is on. Anyway, the presentation is fantastic, and you triggered a lot of memories, and have elicited from me a desire to share something really special with you that I've known since 1994, when Mark Whitford and I were discussing gravity drive, and it has to do with the Spirit bomber. But before I go there, I'm going to ask to share screen. Okay, can I share screen?
Sure. Bruce, you
Okay.
want to? Okay, hold on.
Okay.
Let's see.
I'm going to share screen. And first thing I want to show you is one of my favorite photographs of all time. Tell me when you can see it.
Not yet. There it is. Okay, we
Okay.
got it.
All right. Now that photograph was taken in Vancouver, British Columbia. I believe that's the City Hall in 1937. And it's one of the greatest UFO pictures ever captured. You can see the object flying over City Hall, Vancouver, British Columbia. The great thing about this is the illumination. There's a lot of illumination coming from below, from the building itself, but also the weather conditions. Very cloudy, obviously a lot of humidity in the air, which made it possible for this photographer to get what I consider the best photograph of a UFO in flight under propulsion. And I believe there is plasma involved in this. So I'm going to show you now a large version of this that you can study. Okay, I downloaded this photograph, and now we're going to go into the craft. Okay. Now, when I saw this, my brain went bonkers. Excuse me. We're going to turn that over in a little while to compare it to the B1. But here's the point. When I saw this photograph and I saw this contour, obviously this is the craft right here. Egg-shaped craft like the ones that passed me in 1990. But the important thing is this, the air glow. And it said to me that this craft is not being necessarily pushed through the atmosphere, but perhaps was opening the atmosphere before it and being sucked in. So if there is a technology that ET, or I believe now we may have it, that separates the atmosphere, it will create a vacuum. And into that vacuum, the craft will be sucked, quite literally. And it being a vacuum, there's nothing to penetrate. There'd be no friction. There'd be no sonic boom. Let's take a real close look at it. And I think I'm going to give you a little surprise in a second. One thing that I found in Zoom is that the mouse starts to crawl and doesn't want to go where you send it. But here we go. Okay, there we go. I think that's really, oh, that's excellent. For my purposes, this is excellent. Now,
We are
I'm
still
going
seeing
to
the,
turn
Yeah, we're still
to-
seeing the, yeah.
we're seeing the first
Yeah, this
picture
is,
still.
yeah,
Okay,
this
just
is
so you know.
British Columbia. This is British. Yeah. Now I'm going to flip this over for a reason. Okay, for a comparison that we're going to make in a second with the B1, B2 Spirit. Okay. So now next picture.
Okay, what you have to, each one of those, Robert, I think each one of those has to be shared separately. You have
Right.
one image up there, and that is not
Uh-huh.
flipping or moving. So I think what you have to do is open up the other one and hit share
Hit share
again.
again. Yeah, you're still showing us the town hall. We're still seeing the first, we've seen nothing but the first picture at this point.
Okay. Okay. Okay, let me just see if we can.
Yeah,
Stop
just
sharing.
unshare.
Okay,
Yeah,
here.
stop sharing and then
Okay, unshare and, okay, and then share again. Okay.
Share
Thank you.
again.
All right, so here I have flipped it over.
Okay, there we
Okay.
go.
Now it's
Okay,
going the other way. And there's a reason for it.
there it is.
And the
Okay, now we
reason
got it.
Okay. Okay. Now you see this little notch over here? This gave me a hint that something more unusual is happening. And I also had an encounter with a shooting star, and I saw this a similar effect. Now here's the B1, the B2. Okay. In 1990, from 1994 to 98 or so, Mark Whitford and Bruce Cornet and I worked very closely together. Mark Whitford told me then that one of the ultimate secrets of the B2 was that it had a gravity drive, that it actually curved space-time and rode a gravity wave the way a surfer rides a surfboard. And I said, well, how do you do that? And he said, well, they polarized the leading edge of the wing with positive and the trailing edge of the wing negative. So you see that here, positive here in front,
Yep.
and then this is supposed to be negative sign back here. So they electrify the leading edge and the trailing edge of the B2. Then he said, then they take high voltage electricity and they put it into the fuel and they burn high voltage electricity. And what happens is this negative force field is created on the rear end, while a positive one is on the front. And these gravity fields start to emerge and propel and impel. I would say impel the craft forward. So if you look at this again, I think, am I going to have to share the screen again if I just switch at this moment?
Well,
sir.
try hitting,
Try it.
well, try hitting the button down below. Try hitting your
Okay,
forward
how's that?
button.
No
Yeah,
No, we're
just
still
did.
seeing the same thing.
Yeah, no change.
Okay, so I'll stop sharing and start share again, just for one more comparison.
There you
then-
go.
then we can
Yep.
let this go. But I thought that this is really important for all of us, especially after Bruce has done so much work on it. So there you have it. This is the craft upside down. And now I'm going to stop share and then share it with you the B2. Can you see that?
It's coming up.
Back
Got it.
There it
to
is.
the back to the B2. Okay, so I think that I have an insight, and I'm happy to share it with you. You can see that the contour that they have described, they've delineated in this diagram of the B2 is almost exactly the shape of the field around the 1937 or 39 British Columbia UFO, municipal hall. So there you have it. This is the first time I've ever shown anybody anywhere this diagram, but I think it's time we all wise up.
That's fascinating,
about it.
Robert.
Oh yeah,
Matter of
one
fact,
more thing. Yeah, I will. Sorry to hijack the show,
Not at
but
all.
I want to show you one more thing before we go, because this, who knows, this might be our only opportunity. I'm going to show you a drawing that I did.
If while he's getting that, I want to share something that is absolutely and I can't go into the details of where it come from, but I would in private with anybody that wanted to, because I did aviation documentaries for about 15 years. I hang around with a bunch of pilots, several of which are ex-military pilots. And in the course of conversation about a year ago, we were talking. One of the pilots flew B-2s, and he indicated without really any, he said, well, we don't talk about it, but he was very clear. There is a extremely high voltage applied to the leading edge of the B-2 aircraft. And he said, quote, and it creates he said, I'll just say it creates a plasma effect on the front, which enhances our performance. Now that comes right from a guy who was a lieutenant colonel and flew B-2s and told me that over dinner at Upper Black Eddy at my friend, my old partner's house over dinner with about a half a dozen other pilots. So this kind of corroborates what Robert's saying about the plasma effect. And he said that takes an incredible amount of the transformers and stuff to step it up to, hundreds of thousands of volts on the leading edge. Now, this was right from the horse's mouth. I can tell you that. I can't divulge who it is because I really don't have permission to do that. I don't know what I'd be doing.
Okay, and if I can jump in here to validate what
That's
Bruce
great.
just said, about 20 years ago, the first image that you showed, Robert, I saw pictures of what they call plasma ships. And it was maybe 20,
Yes.
25 years ago. I've seen pictures of them. About 20 years ago, we actually saw, and it's funny that you mentioned town hall, because we had a plasma object fly over our town hall in Long Branch, heading out to sea. And it was very small, it was very high up, but you could make out the plasma shape, especially almost like that teardrop shape that you showed.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been going on for some time, I'd say.
Here's
Okay.
another teardrop, if I may. Here's
Mhm.
another teardrop. This passed it almost hit my airplane. I was flying over Connecticut at about 9:30 at night in the year 2000, May 6, 2000. And I saw the sky light up as if it was daytime. I saw the Atlantic Ocean, and this is 9:30 at night. I saw the Atlantic Ocean and Long Island Sound glimmering as if it were just before sunset with the sun coming off the ocean. And to make a long story short, I had to evade this thing. It was going to crash into my aircraft and I had to evade it. The important thing is that wisp, this little wisp of, this little wisp of ionized air actually is what it was. There should be three big ones. There should be another one out here and another one out here. What I saw, this thing was so hot. It looked to me, my brain said, that thing is so hot, it looks like the atmosphere is afraid of it and is getting out of the way. I actually saw three bow waves of ionized air opening up like this. And it seemed like all of the air got out of the way and this thing was plunging. Then the length of the tail was about 100 feet long, a acetylene torch-like tail. This here was a ruby belt, a ruby red belt with a ruby knuckle, and it was spinning. And I was mesmerized by it, but then I had this inner voice that said, don't look at the ruby knuckle, you'll miss the rest of it. And the rest of it was like the green background behind Bruce Pearson, where he's got the Aurora Borealis going there. And it had every color of green, from lime green, light lime green, to Kelly green, with flames that were lifting. And it looked to me like the heat was holding it up. It wasn't being held up from the bottom. It was so hot, it was as if it was being held by a handle. And that was a huge close encounter. It actually looked the shape of an apple seed. It took 2 bounces, and when I first saw it, my brain was, the sun is shining at 9:30 at night. And I'll tell you this one. I said to myself, did I miss the dawn? Am I on my way to Holland? I thought of Lindbergh, Am I on my way to Holland? Because your brain, pardon the expression, you get brain effed, right? Cognitive dissonance, and your brain is trying to wrestle. I got to explain this to myself. Did I miss the dawn? Am I on the way to Holland?
Your middle name's not Corrigan by any way.
No, not Corrigan.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Okay,
that's all I have to say.
okay, thank you, Robert. Very,
Wow,
very
that's
interesting.
amazing.
Okay, let's go continue on. First of all, Bruce, Bruce Cornet, do you want to make a comment, a response, or then we'll go on and field some more questions from our group.
Well, the only comment I have is that Robert has told me about this meteorite that buzzed his plane, nearly hit his plane. And I even put together a website on that, which is still up, by the way, Robert. And the other thing was, I didn't realize that Mark Whitford had shared so much information about the B2 with you. When was the last time you talked with him?
Oh, I last spoke to Mark about 2 years ago. He's been down in Washington and only comes up for holidays. So we've had only a couple of occasional telephone calls. But he's still doing his work, Mark is still intensely interested. All of us have had UFO experiences since childhood. All of us were approached early in our lives, both by UFOs, and my brother and Mark were also abductees. And
Well, I haven't talked to Mark since 2006. So I would love to get his phone number from you.
Oh, sure. Well, I'll give you his email, and we'll get back in contact and start brainstorming again.
Okay.
Okay.
All
Sounds
right.
like a good idea.
Thanks. Okay, let's go down. Let's go down the list. Nick Curto.
Yeah, hi. This has been an amazing. Hi, this has been so amazing. I can't tell you. This has been an afternoon I will never forget. Really? Wow. And my question is, and this is just for everybody who's talked, what is the deal? The bottom line, what is the deal between us and them? Is there a cooperation, and what the cooperation, why? What is that about? Does anybody have any sense and any ideas about what the deal is?
Yes. If you have to pretty much be a renegade and listen to ancient aliens and follow their storyline of what they're trying to tell us and inform us, although they don't get all the facts straight, the evidence seems to be piling up that extraterrestrials have been influencing and interfering with human evolution and societies for not just thousands of years, but tens of thousands of years. And so if you follow Zechariah Sitchin's concepts of the Anunnaki genetically engineering us, then we are in effect their children. And that they think they possess us and can do whatever they want with us. And that is where a lot of things are happening today, where you say, well, it's the cabal that's behind it. No, it's higher than the cabal. Or maybe it's the Council of Nine. Well, it could be higher than the Council of Nine. But there is this activity that's going on, and nobody wants to take, take credit for it and realize that this is really where the truth ultimately lies. And unfortunately, one of the biggest problems that I see is with religion. Religion has been created in order to create believers out of humans that there are angels and that there is a God or gods and things of this nature. Well, isn't this really boiled down to definition and of what the angels are and what ETs are. And Ancient Aliens has been trying to get people to realize that maybe what our ancestors thought were gods coming down from on high were just extraterrestrials.
Mhm.
So why are we now exempt from that possibility?
Right.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, Susan Johnson, I see you have your hand raised.
Yes, I wanted to answer that question. What do they want to do with us? Well, it depends on the race and their agenda. But overall, there's some negative ones controlling the evil global elite, just like Bruce Cornet was explaining. And also there's some other factions up there that are warrior types that are trying to liberate the human race, not because they like them, but because they know it, they recognize it as a planetary race with its own rights to its own sovereignty and stuff. And they're trying to liberate it. And also there's been an ongoing battle between different factions to control the Stargate portals and Orion, Cygnus, and the Sirius and the Epsilon Bootes constellations, because those are major Stargate systems. And because of that, the human race was being used by the Anunnaki as a commodity to say, well, this is our planet, this is our property, because we own it because of the sovereign indigenous races that we put here. And also the humans have to realize this is not the original human race that was put here. The original humans that were multidimensional, that were more like evolved, like the Greys are, were removed, and they had to go into colony ships and be removed because the humans that are here subsequently are a watered down version of the original human form.
Okay.
And I think that's all I have to say, but that's basically it. It's been ongoing wars. And that before then, before the humans were put here, this planet was used as an outpost, and there were several different types of alien colonists that were put here on this planet that were here, and they were using it as a ports of call because they were monitoring the systems, the Stargate systems and stuff, and that all of the pyramids and everything around the planet, the reason they were so obsessed with monitoring the moon, the rising of the moon, the equinoxes and the solstices, is because that marks the exact position of certain constellations, which would be the marker in space for the different portal systems. And that's why all the pyramids around the world and all the different artifacts around the world point toward these portal systems: Orion, Cygnus, Sirius, and Bootes. And then, like Bruce Cornet was explaining earlier when he did the research in Wallkill Hill Valley, he explained, and that Jewish cemetery, every time that the Bootes constellation goes up overhead, there's a transponder below the ground that sends off a signal to the constellation. That's not an accident, because there's a portal system there too.
That's right. Thank you, Susan. That's very interesting. Booties is what, 40 light years away, right?
I'm not sure how far it is, but Arcturus is in Bootes also, and there's a lot of Arcturian races coming down here too. So
Right.
It's a whole big conglomerate. It's a warring factions over we want to liberate the star systems and liberate the humans, only because we believe that everything should live in its own sovereignty and its own right. And then we put in a sovereign government from their own progenitors, and then once everything is stabilized, we leave. We don't control planets, we liberate them.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Susan. Very interesting. Good points. I'm going to go right on down the list here. Okay. Next on my list is Chantel Topero.
Yeah, hi there. I'm a retired aerospace engineer.
Oh, okay.
And I was a professor at UCLA teaching engineering, and I am the educational chair for the Society for Scientific Exploration. And through that and the Academy of Consciousness, which was at Princeton, I became a member of that group many years ago, and have had some amazing experiences. But I've never had a UFO experience, and I've gone to quite a few UFO conferences and trying to understand this. And I just don't, look at us, there's only like 12 of us. This was just an incredible, conversation. And why is there no, why is this so goddamn in the closet? I was hoping that Trump, because of his mannerisms and stuff, that he would be the one to blab it all out. But obviously that didn't happen. So it's like, when is this going to become like more mainstream? I mean, I've talked to enough experiencers. See, I believe that I have to have the experience myself to really understand it. And I've had enough experiences, but not UFO experiences or NDE for that matter. But anyway, to know that there is, parallel universes and things going on. I took Stephen Greer's, 7-day, his program CE5 in it was Fredericksburg, Texas. So, I mean, I've put some skin in the game, so to speak, to try to, to me, it's like a greased pig and I just can't catch it. And then I listen to you guys and I'm like, damn, I mean, this is just too far out just to be all made up, and there's a lot of bullshit out there too. So it's like, how do you sieve the bullshit from the real stuff? And so, I'm still trying to catch this greased pig and trying to put it in my understanding of, reality, because obviously I think so much of our reality in our history books and things are false on many fronts. So I just feel very fortunate to have found about you guys to be able to attend these lectures and properly educate myself to what's going on, because it's so frustrating, and I just don't know where to turn to. And I'm waiting to see, I went to Stephen Greer saying I didn't see anything. I was like so disappointed because I like to think of myself as open-minded, and, so I'm hoping that someday, some benevolent being will visit me and say, hey, here I am, you're on the right track, it's good
Well,
stuff.
Chantal, you're with the right group. We may be small,
Thank
but
you,
we're
Chantal.
powerful.
So anyway, that's my,
Okay, well, just a quick question for you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes.
You're an engineer by training, right?
yes.
Did you work in the defense aerospace
Yes, I
industry?
did. I spent 10 years at Hughes Aircraft and another
Oh,
27 years at Northrop Grumman. And I
wow.
was working extremely classified level.
Yes.
Plus, I was a professor of engineering at UCLA and other universities. So, I mean, I'm extremely intelligent and well educated, and so it just boggles me that this particular topic is such a slippery slope, and
Yeah.
and that's why a couple of years ago, being retired, I says, okay, I'm going to go to the MUFONs and the UFO International Conference and stuff like that, and so I'm just trying just desperately to understand and to, because what I'm interested in is the science of the subjective, is how do we incorporate all the anomalous events that do not fit in objective science. So that's kind of like my general kind of focus in my retirement is how do we cultivate a science which embraces these things. And in the case of UFO, there's real science out there, but of course people's experiences are qualitative, and it's usually
Sure.
repeatable and it's people's word of mouth. But I've talked to enough experiencers out there at the various conferences, and these are not loony toony people. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Right.
You've had it too, and so it's like,
Well,
gotta be
here's
something here. So I'm
right.
so frustrated,
Well, there's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of really excellent work that's been done over the years by very, very intelligent and, with it people and everything. In the aerospace industry, you might want to look up Bob Wood.
He's a
Also,
personal friend of mine. He's actually one of the, he was like on the founding group of founding fathers of the SSC, the Society for Scientific Exploration. And he's a dear,
Yeah.
dear friend of mine.
well, he's a
And his
he's
wife
good guy
Lynn.
to good guy to
Oh,
go
God,
to.
the guy is awesome. And That's one of the reasons I started to drive down to Orange County to those meetings because
Right.
of Bob and yeah.
Okay, there's one other person, and Bruce Cornet mentioned on his last slide. Bill, what's Bill's last name, Bruce? Bill?
Thompson,
Tompkins.
Bill Tompkins.
Tompkins?
That's right.
Tompkins, right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
actually, I got autographed copy of the book
Book,
that
yeah.
Bob Wood translated. I mean, not translated, but edited for
Bill Tompkins.
Bill Tompkins and yeah. So I've looked
Right.
at some of that stuff too. And then the other person
Okay.
I personally know is Hal Putoff.
Okay.
Yes. Okay.
And
Well, then there's Jack Serafati as well.
yeah. So I mean, actually, it's Hal Putoff that got me into all this. If I can just tell you a short little story,
Sure.
Well,
since it's such an intimate group, you might not mind. Just tell me to shut up if you want me to.
well, there's a couple other people that we have to get to too. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, quickly, please share it with us.
Yeah.
So anyway, I ended up at this in 1989, I think it was, or 1990. I ended up at this Academy of Consciousness at Princeton, and I mean, I was so dyed in the wool aerospace engineer, you know, totally military stuff, and you know, just real like this, right? And so I had a IEEE conference that I organized, and Bob John of Princeton had presented a paper, which is the first of this controversial stuff. So to make a long story short, after I got the proceedings from my conference, I read his paper and I said, you know, I kind of just don't understand what he's talking about. So I called the lab at Princeton and I says, hey, do you have extra information? And so they says, oh, we have a book, Margins of Reality. So I rolled my eyes because I'm thinking Margins of Reality. I'm thinking, you know, psilocybin and drugs, and you know, I'm like, oh God, no, you know. But you know, the lady was really nice, and she says, well, you know, I'll send you our book, Margins of Reality, and some papers that we're unable to publish because of controversy. And oh, by the way, we're having this Academy of Consciousness. Would you like to apply? So I thought, since I was so career orientated, I saw this application for Academy of Consciousness. Consciousness wasn't even in my vocabulary, right? Because as an engineer, hardcore aerospace, you don't think about consciousness, right? And so I applied. And so I went to this Academy of Consciousness, totally, you know, virginal, for lack of a better word. And here there are all these, you know, PhD physicists and psychologists and stuff like that. One of the guys was Hal Putoff, and he was like the only kind of guy I could relate to because he was like military and stuff. So I kind of like hung out with him. And so one of the exercises we had to do was to do remote viewing. So before the day before, I was walking along the little path where Einstein used to walk along the river with Hal Putoff. And, you know, being very cocky and smart, I said to Hal, you know, because I stuck with him because he was like the only person I could relate to. And so I said, Hal, you know what, in the top shelf of my cabinet, you know, in this highly secure, you know, office with guards at the front gate and then all kinds of key codes, and the safe had a combination lock and a key lock. Says, you know what, in the first drawer, top drawer, remote view that, ha, ha, ha. You know, he says, okay, I gotta get back to you. Next day at breakfast, he puts a piece of paper. It's the exact freaking geometry of
Wow.
the thing I was working on. So that bent my reality pretty good. I thought, oh my God, breach of security, blah, blah, blah. But then the next day we had to do remote viewing, and they taught us how to do it. And then I did it and I was successful. So that was the pivotal moment for me when my reality changed. And then it wasn't until a few years later that I saw, well, Bob and Brenda are always going to this SSC conferences. Maybe I should go. And it was 2003, I think, or it was in Las Vegas. So it was close enough to go. And so that's really when everything opened up. And then eventually one of the topics studied by the SSC is UFOs. And that's how I came to this. And it's by far the biggest grease pig that I'm still.
You're right.
Wow.
So
Some
anyway,
story.
that's the long and short of it. And I just wanted to share that because I thought you might.
Very good. Thank you very much, Chantal.
Where are you
Appreciate
located,
it.
if I may? Excuse me for interrupting.
Yes, of course, I'm in Redondo Beach.
Oh, okay. Oh, nice.
Ah,
Yeah, it's surfing. What are you
okay.
doing? You're not supposed to be surfing.
Okay, going down the list here. Harry Rainbow.
No, just listening to all of this. And I have to admit, most of this, the science is beyond me. So I'm trying to figure it out.
Stick
for
with it.
joining.
It'll come to you.
Thanks for joining.
Okay, next, okay, Robert, okay, Francis Nyes.
Well, Robert had his hand up. Let's let him.
Yeah, I just wanted to say to Chantel, have you ever asked for a sighting?
Yes, I have. I'm yes.
'Cause I have a friend in British Columbia again. He is 74 years old, a very close friend of mine. And he told me that he was very disappointed that he'd never seen a UFO. So he went out one night and he said, "Hey, listen, I want to see one of you UFOs. I'm a friend of Robert Morningstar's." He says a week.
Okay, so I need to
Drop some names.
You can use the same
Topic
technique. I'd be
names.
curious about results. But he drove out the next week. He stopped at a light. A UFO appeared above the trees, and he drew it for me. And you know what? It looked like a Tic Tac.
Wow.
What he drew. He's a mechanical engineer.
Great.
So I
Thank
just wanted
Okay.
to suggest that.
I will reference you.
There you go. You're all set. You got your lead in there.
Bruce Cornet sent a text. He had to leave. He had an emergency. So,
Oh,
Okay, Francis Nyes. I think
Howdy.
you're next on the list. I'm
Can you
sorry.
hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay.
5x5.
Great. Well, I'm an old UFO buff and, a producer at times. I pride myself in a documentary you can find online called UFOs, A Matter of Public Policy. And many years ago, we had the Disclosure Project. And I was one of the first people in the room. Bruce was with me. Bruce and I are longtime friends. And I had the best camera position of any person there. And it was a great documentary, also involving a lot of the UFO conferences and Steve Bassett and such.
Mhm.
So go enjoy that. It's kind of like a blast from the past. And but a lot of people are still relevant today. Stephen Bassett is very
still
relevant.
at it. Yeah, he's still at it.
You
Still
still at it?
swinging away down there.
That's right. So what I did is I cross-edited the conferences with that disclosure event, and and highlighted some of the best parts of that presentation with Stephen Greer. Also, I met Bruce many years ago in the Connecticut area, and there was a UFOologist, I'm sure you know the name, Phil Imbrogno. Does anybody
Yeah.
Imbrogno?
Yes.
And he knew a friend of mine, and before you know it, we're traipsing all through Connecticut, going to the ancient stone chambers. Okay, which Phil wrote books about, and Bruce was there with his magtometer, and Ellen Crystal, if you know her, a psychic personality, was also there. So Bruce would go in, find the energy vortex for this magtometer, and Ellen would then come in and feel this, at a separate moment, and feel the same vibrations with her psychic ability. So that was a lot of fun, and I'll never forget that. But doing that documentary and doing being involved with NASA in a love-hate relationship in terms of trying to get their scientists to have public discourse with scientists outside of NASA was something that put me on a list and was kind of trying for many years. But I was in direct contact with Dr. Edward Weiler at the time. Don't ask me what year it was, about year 2000. And I was trying to have this televised debate with scientists inside and outside of NASA. So Dr. Weiler, seeing that I was associated with Richard Hoagland, we know who he is, right?
Sure. Enterprise mission.
Okay. basically was bothering to talk to me and saying, well, tell you what, go out and get only the best scientists in the world and form the rules of engagement, and I'll highly consider your little program. So I go out and I do that. I get the best scientists in the world to have this discourse with NASA scientists, including Dr. David Darling. And the rules of engagement are as such that both sides pick 10 pictures of anomalies, and that nobody gets any more time than anybody else. Nobody upstages anybody. And those are the fair rules of engagement. So Dr. Weiler says, really? You did that? Well, I can't have my scientists come to this. Damn. And so I was a little perturbed, as you can imagine, after doing all that work. And then the next month, October sometime, late October, I get news that Congress came out with a new act called the Data Quality Act. And for the first time in history, citizens could question any federal agency on the integrity of their data. So about that time, a little thing happened on Mars. The Mars Themis probe had gone over, and strangely, Hillary Clinton and Senator McCain forced NASA's hand to listen to the people. I mean, of all people, those two, right? Forced NASA's hand to go and photograph the Cydonia region once more with the new probe. So the probe is basically infrared and has some ability to penetrate the ground concerning heat signatures. And of course, then they meld that with the regular photos and to come up with a composite, right? So Hoagland was having a little blog going, and there was Keith Laney there at the blog. Do we know who he is? I mean, if you don't know these people, I'll explain them. Keith Laney was an image analyst at NASA, but he's still very active in his spare time to search for anomalies. At any rate, somebody comes into the blog and by the code name Banff and says, Keith, go look at this certain photograph right now. And Keith says, what? Come to think of it, I just saw that photograph in the database from Themis. And he says, don't ask questions, just do it. And he pulls it up from the database. Am I going too long?
Well, I do have to get to a couple more people, and we normally close at 4:30, so it's about 4:32 right now. So
if you want to know more of the story, I mean, in a nutshell.
We'd like to have you come back.
How about you come back and be a guest?
Yes, exactly. That would be great.
Let me make sure I get your
last couple of years, so I don't know.
Well, let me make sure I get your email address.
Okay.
Where are you located, Frank?
I'm in outside of sunny Miami.
Oh, okay.
Good for you. Okay, but anyway, you got my invitation, right? That was passed on to you.
Well, Bruce gave it to me. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. My email. Get my email address and everything. Send me your contact information. I'll make sure you're on the contact list, and
Right.
I'll contact you. We do this once a month, so I'll give you a call. Yeah, give me your phone number and all, and I'll give you a call.
Congratulations for organizing. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Let's see who's next on our list. Stan. Where is Stan? I see him. There he
Stan's
is.
there. He's not asleep yet.
Not at all. We got a little time left. I guess a lot of people have the big question of how come more people aren't active on this particular situation. And part of it, I mean, being in the Air Force, it's always a need to know. And I think the government doesn't really need us to know anything, really.
Right.
So there's 12 of us who do have an interest, obviously, for various reasons, because probably most of us kind of had something to do with what we talk about. And once you have something to do, whether it's a coin collecting, stamp collecting, or UFOs, you have an interest. And our interest is just ongoing. And most of us at this point in our lives have the time to devote to look into it a little bit deeper and share a lot of stories. and some have a lot of stories to share. So, and also regarding the remote viewing, well, that works in two ways. Remote viewing actually does work quite well once you learn how to do it. It also goes to remote healing because one works with the other. And if you're taught how to do that, you can do both.
Interesting.
Very good.
Okay.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Okay, going on down. Veronica. Are you there, Veronica? Oh, you're muted, Veronica. There we go.
Yes, I'm here, but I don't have any questions. Thank
Oh,
you.
okay.
Thank
Well,
you for
welcome.
joining.
Hope you'll join us again.
Okay, yeah, well, thanks.
Okay. Did I miss anybody? I saw a couple people, but they dropped off. So anyway, let me, okay, I see a hand raised. Yes,
Nick.
Robert.
I want everyone to know that you and I are going to have an interview on Monday night at 10 o'clock Eastern on
Yes.
the Right Stuff radio program. I don't want to miss the
I
opportunity.
owe you some stuff too.
Oh, yeah. Well, we have an article. I'm writing an article about Joseph's experiences in the Coast Guard. We share a lot in common in that regard. And on Monday night at 10 o'clock on Studio B at freedomslips.com. That's Revolution Radio. Freedom's Lips, easy to remember. Think of kissing the Statue of Liberty. freedomslips.com, Studio B, 10 o'clock on Monday. Joseph and I are going to have a dialogue.
Pop it in the chat if you would, Robert.
Oh, yes, sure. That's a good idea. Okay, thank you.
Nick,
Okay. Nick.
I don't want to leave Nick out.
Hi. Just again, this data that people are saying, if someone could also send an email with that data of these shows coming up, that would be very appreciated.
Okay. Very good. Okay, Bruce, why don't you finish with your question or comment, and then I'll have one thing to add, and we can all go and have dinner.
Since we're mentioning other programs, I'd like to suggest you might want to listen to Peter Robbins' show on KGRA. It's KGRA Radio. You can get it on iHeart or go to kgra.com. And he's on Monday nights, 7 to 9. He's had some very, very good guests. He had Lee Spiegel on a couple of weeks ago. Peter's an excellent interviewer, and I would highly recommend that. Also, Chantal, if you would be willing to be a guest, we would certainly love to hear what you can disclose and some insight from the aerospace engineering standpoint. I think that would be fascinating. Robert would, love to have you on as a full guest also, if I can speak for Joe on that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But
and
all
Nick,
I can say, Nick, also, we'd like to have you on as a guest, and Stanley. I think all of you bring a lot to the table here. Now your experience is valid and anecdotal is, I taught the long form documentary production and for William Patterson University. And one of the things I used to tell the students is, it's like building a wall, and the anecdotal evidence is one brick in that foundation that eventually adds up to a wall. So personal experiences from credible people is not to be overlooked. And my point of view is trying to bring some science into it, some nuts and bolts into it, but also the analytical side of, as we said, some of the more esoteric aspects of it, whether it be telepathic or remote viewing and so on. These are all parts of the fabric that we use to get a clearer picture. I have to tell you, I am just every month that we do this, I'm amazed at what I learn and what I hear. And I am so grateful to be a part of this that I thank you all for taking the time to be with us, because I feel sorry for people that, God bless them, but if they have nothing but the NBA or the NFL to keep them busy, they're missing out on the big wide world as it truly does exist. And thank you, Joe, for all your time and effort, and also to Bruce, even though he's not here for the presentation.
Thank you, Bruce. And Bruce, I think, is here. But I do
is
have,
he? Okay.
let me just recognize we do have a person that joined us a little late, Robert Shanahan. Hi,
He's
Robert.
a
You
guest
want to
of
say
mine.
hi?
Robert's a friend of mine, and I asked him to come in.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well,
Thanks,
welcome,
Bob.
Robert. Glad you were able to show up. Okay.
Sorry, so late.
No problem. Also, I just want to thank everybody for being a good, lively group willing to participate at all levels, and it is greatly appreciated. Bruce Cornet, special thanks to you. Even with the technical difficulties that we experience from time to time. Fascinating interview, fascinating piece of data. And I'm going to be reaching out for Bob Spearing to find out, to make sure that you have been engaged in that pine bush issue. They're going to be doing that museum up there or something. So anyway, that's all I have. Thank you. Remember, we will be meeting again second Saturday of the month. Also, I just want to mention that Susan Johnson is also going to be scheduled. It might be a special one. So anyway, I'll send out information, and we'll cover all aspects of the topics we've been talking about today. So that's all I have, everyone. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for being
This
with
is
us.
great.
Be safe,
Best.
everybody.
Thank you.
A pleasure.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Pleasure.
Oh, I will be uploading this within a day. It'll be up on YouTube. I'll send out the link and everything like that, so you can actually, review it or whatever. Or if your friends haven't had a chance to see it and they want to, please share it with them. So
Thank you
anyway,
all. Be safe, everybody.
Thank you.
have a great weekend.
Much love to everybody. Much love.
Same here,
Take
Nick.
care. Bye-bye.
Good night and thank you.
Right.
See you again.
Good night.
So long.
Bye-bye.